Hello everyone. Today I'm going to start with a new topic, that is elements of policy climate. And when we talk about the elements of policy climate, that is how, in what manner, in what structure the policies have been created. What is the political environment? What is the neoliberal phases of understanding how policies have been formulated and implemented? What are the key components in this political structure, or the social or economic aspects when you talk about creating policy. So policy climate particularly focuses on the socio-economic political structure of any nation or a country, which helps in shaping, which helps in formulating a particular policy. So if you talk about the political environment, the first part of it, the political environment, which consists of political institutions, actors, and processes that would affect in the formulation and implementation of any particular policies. This environment, it shapes how policies are crafted, debated, as well as enacted, influencing the overall, the effectiveness and efficiencies and the direction in which the social policies would function. In fact, the concurrence and the basic similarity of experiences across, diverse countries, they may have obscured the need for a comparative research into the political origins of social policy change, because the policy changes, it is not rigid. There's an element of flexibility depending upon the environment of the nation. So one of the most common assumptions is that the primary drivers of social policy expansions were economic globalization and rapid economic transformation, including liberalizing reforms that increased informalization, enhance the vulnerability of the poor in the developing countries. So increasing poverty and vulnerability rising from various economic growth, such as globalization, privatization, liberalization, they have been an economic transformation which were the key drivers for bringing about the social protection. So in this context, domestic government, international agencies, including the World Bank, and donor agencies such as the IMF or International Monetary Fund and so on, UN organizations, they began either to experiment with or to encourage new forms of social protection. So giving the comparable economic transformations across emerging economies and the nascent international discourse of inclusive growth, domestic politics has often taken a backseat of explanations where social policy initiatives came from and how they were shaped and sustained. So the new social policies, if you talk about the new, particularly after 1990s, in Indian context, the new social policies, they can be seen as a part of lower and middle income country government countries government's response government's policy response to the consequences of varying constellations of economic crisis, structural adjustment programs, and globalization, and recent transitions to democracy. So policies adopted in the 80s and 1980s and the early 1990s in response to economic crisis, which included public expenditure cuts, privatization, and decentralization, had often increased poverty and inequality and undermined the quality of service provisions. In addition, by the early 2000s, some large emerging economies were experiencing higher levels of economic growth, which increased the resources available for newer social policy. So we can say that although the liberalization, globalization, they had enhanced and illustrated economic growth, but nevertheless, it has also resulted in expenditure and the cut in the public expenditure losses, and due to privatization and decentralization, it had further expanded or further aggravated the issue of poverty. There had been an unequal income distribution of resources and income, and also the quality of social services were equally affected. So some critics they've gone further to argue that mainstream development discourses in the global north have primarily regarded social policy as a corrective to economic dislocations, rather as a form of collective public action to improve the uh, well-being. For many years, the structural changes faced by the developing countries in the era of globalization and responses to them had been viewed in essentially similar terms to those faced by the advanced industrialized economies or countries. In the global north, it was argued that the globalization was opening up for new social fissures between those with skills and mobility, and those without meaning, and those without the meaning that policymakers at the turn of the millennium had to ensure that international economic integration does not contribute to domestic social disintegration. So, such arguments about necessary correctives to the dislocations arising from the global integration also being applied to understand the compulsion driving governments in lower middle income countries, lower and middle income countries to expand social provision. And for instance, if we talk about an Indian context, Arvind Subramaniam, now the chief advisor to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi since 2014, had applied to Roderick's argument to India, and it had been said that within quote, I would like to say that financial integration, whatever it merits, exposes the economy to greater volatility. Cushioning against this requires social insurance mechanisms, often in the form of greater spending, especially during downturns. In 2008 and 2009, the Indian economy was buffeted by the vagaries of international markets because of India's increased integration with them, had to deploy counter-cyclical fiscal policies. One legacy is increased government spending and larger overall deficits. This was in his way to counteract that. You know there had been certain vagaries in terms of in international markets, and because of this India's increasing integration, they had to come up with more counter-cyclical fiscal policies. So welfare is then, if we talk about this, furthermore, that social policy changes had taken on regional inflections also. When welfare state retrenchment since 1970s was an outcome of globalization, especially the increased competition over mobile capital and downwards pressure over labor costs in a competitive international market. Thus, there is thus no a consensus on either the casual direction of increased trade openness and capital mobility and social policy, or on the precise connections between these policies. Many studies have highlighted instead the effects of deindustrialization and the shrinking of the manufacturing sector within countries, a shift of the workforce into sectors where productivity improvements are more limited, the demographic pressures of an aging population, and domestic policies were broadly taken up. So, social policy changes have taken, or taken clear have taken on clear regional inflections. This suggested that a more localized rather than straightforwardly globalized form of policy diffusion may have been at work. For example, cash transfers have been popular in some parts of Latin America or sub-Saharan Africa, but in South Asia there has been greater skepticism about replacing older in-kind subsidies with cash transfers. So the existence of regional patterns suggested that domestic political factors and historical trajectories are more important in influencing the shape and consequence of social policy interventions in response to larger economic transformation. So, social policies initiatives adopted across the global south, if we talk particularly, if we talk about these countries like Brazil, China, India, and South Africa, they have gone beyond simply establishing a safety net or residual function during periods of high economic growth when resources can be redistributed to prevent social dislocation. So, many new initiatives have been designed in ways that seek to build social and human capital or the capacities of the poor, as well as alleviating income poverty. So, in other words, social policies in the global south have both a protective and productive function. These policies are conceived by the many policymakers as long run contributors to economic growth and hold a political appeal to leaders uh, of both democratic and authoritarian governments. So there are strong indications that policy agendas in lower and middle income countries increasingly, even if partially, include a concern for elements of what a growing literature calls as social investment regime. So, in fact, in India there has been a focus on in India also, if you talk about, there has also been a focus on establishing, or rather, it has established a social rights perspective. Now, countries were responding to the legacies of liberal economic policies of the 1990s, which had reduced social sector investment, and that new social policies were enabled by the revenues generated by faster economic growth. If we trace back, in India, the general elections of 2004 saw the elections of the Congress party-led United Progressive Alliance. This government interpreted its mandate as reflecting a revolt of the rural poor who had been left out of the benefits of economic liberalization pursued the early 1990s. Well, this was not an entirely inaccurate account of the social dynamics behind the election outcomes. Nevertheless, it provided the rationale for a new era of investment in rights-based social programs. So the UPA government began with the flagship Right to Information Act of 2005 and the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005, under which rural households could demand up to 100 days work. And in its two terms in office, it also passed the Right to Education Act 2009 and National Food Security Act 2013 that gave legislative protection to the notion of right to food. So, informed by prominent civil society activists who sat on a new National Advisory Council and helped to draw up legislation, the UP government sought to put social rights on a legislative footing. Then, if we want to further delve deeper into understanding the politics of social policies, that what approaches are more suitable, or what kind of approaches are there to understand the political structure, the political environment in which the social policies are framed. Understanding the politics of social policies involves examining how governments, interest groups, and individuals interact to shape policies that would address social issues like healthcare, welfare, housing, education, and labor rights. So, the complexity of these policies arises from the intersection of diverse values, ideologies, economic constraints, and well as social needs. Primarily, there are certain four important approaches apart from the other approaches which I would be discussing. But then these are four more generalized way to understand the political dimensions or the political aspect of any country, or even in fact the political as well as economic aspect, economic structure of any country, to understand the formulation, or in what manner the social policies are shaped and formulated, or shaped or formulated and implemented. The first comprises a body of political economy literature which focuses on varieties of welfare capitalism and suggests that models of capitalist development produce distinct sets of choices about social policy provision. And so the whatever the capitalist structure is, or whatever when we in my previous lecture I have discussed about welfare state and the three important historical approaches of or rather models of welfare state, when we have discussed about in how these welfare state has been instrumental in bringing about social policy measures, or in meeting the goals and objectives of social policy. So it suggested that the capitalist development produced, the capitalist structure structure in a way had led to the production, the formulation of what kind of social policies, provisions, or welfare measures or schemes should be initiated. The second approach consisted of studies commonly labeled as power resources theories that unpack the ways that the organization and strength of different interest groups, and particularly trade unions and left wing parties, influence policy. So, there are interest groups, there are lobbyists, there are pressure groups in the form of trade union, association, organizations. They also have tremendous influence on policy making systems. So, it talks about the power structure, that what would be during the discourse of any policy making, or during, talking about developmental aspect, the power structure or the power vested with certain associations and organizations in the form of interest groups or pressure groups or lobbyist groups, they would exert tremendous influence, and they would, with their own vested interests, would try to shape the policies in the which would favor these groups or these influential parties, or any influential, any influential pressure groups. The third approach, which followed the institutional political science, focuses on the political institutions such as the electoral systems and the number of parties, whether it is executive, legislative, relations, the role of courts and structures of federalism or decentralization, and policy feedback. So, the effects of prior policy choices in constraining and or shaping the options of later policymakers. So, sometimes the effect or the institutions, the political institutions, they also play a very significant role in shaping the policies. That what is the role of the executive, legislature, judiciary, the role of the federal courts, or the decentralization of power and authority. In fact, the policy feedback in terms of what policy, what alternatives and choices were taken in terms of understanding the while making a policy, while formulating a policies. So, what had been the outcome of a particular policy? How it has impacted the larger community? What had been the benefits of the constraining, any the constraints, the challenges? So, what are the available options which were there? So, that would also be considered as a reference point for the policy makers to make further policies. And then, to these reasonably well established approaches, there had been a fourth one also in the developing countries context, and it would be relatively the autonomous role of political leaders or policy entrepreneurs in challenging or changing the, apart from the various, these were the generalized way of understanding the approaches, or rather the major ways of making a policy, and how what is a political environment in which a policy can be created. But then are other major approaches to analyze the politics of social policy. First is the institutional approach. It focuses on the role of the government institutions. If you talk about the institution, as the name suggests, it focuses on the role of government institutions and the way political structures, whether it is a parliamentary or presidential system or a federal system, how they shape social policies. These institutionalists, they argue that the structure and the rule of institutions, whether it is a legislative procedure or whether it is a judicial oversight or and bureaucratic organization, they heavily influence the policy outcomes. When the policies are made through institutions, or there are the bureaucratic system, so their influence is tremendous in terms of the impact and outcome. There would be significant changes and significant variation, there would be certain elements they play a very significant role in social policies, leading to significant changes across various states in terms of medical, health, or housing. So, institutional policies would depend upon the resources available in a particular state, and how they cater, or what kind of the institutions, what kind of power and authority the institutions hold in the implementation of the policy. So that's why there would be certain variations, whether in terms of medical aid or housing assistance, which might differ. Then there is a class and power based approaches, which the class and power based approaches, it particularly focuses on economic classes and power dynamics that between them, which would impact the social policy prescriptions. It is deeply rooted in the Marxist and neo-Marxist theories, and this approach views social policy as a tool which can serve the interest of the dominant economic class, often by maintaining social stability or securing labor force productivity. So, this class and power based approach is primarily centered on economic power and economic relations. So the dominant, if we look into that part, the capitalist, at one point of time, the capitalist society, or when capitalism came into existence, then that was a dominant economic class. Although the only difference is that if we talk about the today capitalist, the modern capitalist structure, it also focuses on providing welfare measures and maintaining social stability, or looking into the needs and demands of the labor market. But initially, that was with the rise of the industrial revolution, the capitalist structure that time were more dominant on dominant economic class. They were particularly working class and the ruling class at that time, and it had only focused on their means of ownership and production, rather than focusing on the welfare aspect of. There was rampant exploitation of the workers. So, but today, if you talk about today's capitalist structure, the modern capitalist, or or it can be said in the Marxist and neo-Marxist theories, that today it is focusing also on maintaining social stability, trying to bridge the gap between the income, between two different or various groups in the society. So trying to bridge the gap between those who are privileged and those who are less privileged. So welfare policies, they might be understood as a way to control social unrest, and they provide minimal support to prevent extreme poverty, rather than to be truly redistributive well. But although the idea, the welfare schemes and welfare policies, they do aim at reducing or alleviating poverty, providing them the basic amenities and look into their basic needs approach. But then, yes, through the means of social policies, they try to at least it through the means of social policies, there is a process of redistributing wealth and income and resources. Then there is a political economy approach. The political economy approach, it focuses, or it explores at how economic structures and the capitalist market would influence the development of social policies. Whenever there is, if the economic growth has been accelerated, or if there is a rise in the economic growth, then it would invest in other in other sectors such as health, education, and housing. But some of the critics have argued that sometimes the growing dependency on the welfare measures has resulted in a lot of expenditure which is on the government. Thus they wanted to curb the public expenditure cost, and thus by reducing the welfare means and measures to a larger population. However, this approach, it examines, if we talk about this political economy approach, it examines at how economic globalization and trade policies and neoliberal ideologies, they shape social policies, often pushing towards privatization and reducing government intervention in social services. So the one part of this, if we talk about the political economic structure, the rise of neoliberalism since 1980s or 1990s particularly, has led to a push for privatized healthcare and education system, altering the public's access to these essential services. So people, apart from the government's role, apart from the government's obligations to provide welfare means, with the neoliberalism, the private party is given more authority and power, and and it had altered the public's accessibility to avail the services which have been in the area of healthcare or education or housing and so on. Then policy feedback approach, it analyzes or it focuses how the existing policies create political constituencies that would influence future policy developments. So the policy creates feedback loops where the benefits which have been provided by a policy foster constituencies that advocate for its continuation or expansion. So this approach emphasizes that how policies shape social expectations and mobilize support or opposition. So this particularly, when we get the feedback of a particular policy, when we get to understand the impact and when we understand the outcome of a particular policy, it helps to create, it gives an edge that in what manner, in which direction the policies could be further reviewed, analyzed, or replicated in other parts of countries. So it emphasizes that what are the expectations it has with a particular group, and how much support it can garner, garner from it can how much support it can. It emphasizes that how social expectations and how much support they can mobilize and create with the existing political structure. So the next is the cultural and ideational approach. Now, it looks at the role of cultural values. If we talk about the cultural and ideational approaches, it looks into the cultural value, belief, and ideas in shaping policies. These are also important because this suggests that societal attitudes towards poverty, work, and welfare influence which policies should gain more support and which policies should be immediately implemented and formulated. Like nations with strong beliefs in individual responsibility may support limited welfare, while others with a more collective view may support extensive social safety nets. In India and elsewhere, in India, particularly being a welfare state, so the support of the government and the obligation of the government is of has a collective approach where people because of its diverse population, it requires extensive social safety nets, particularly those who are much marginalized and vulnerable, like scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, women, people with differently able people, and so on. There had been differences in social policies across countries, and it reflects their cultural differences in attitudes towards the social welfare, the idea of social welfare state, and collective responsibility. Then there is a comparative policy approach. It focuses on this that compares policies of across different countries or regions or nations to identify the patterns and causes of policy differences. It is quite evident that policy made in one country would not be extremely replicated or would not be the same in any other countries. There are different populations, there are different geographical contexts, there are different cultural barriers, cultural belief system practices, which may also shape the differences in the policies. And it also what would be differences, the in policies which are made in different parts of the country, like we have policies for labors, ours would be quite different from the European countries or from the Western country, or policies related to women or health or education. In some, however, some policies would be more generalized in nature, like if we talk about converting the sustainable development development goals, they become maybe universal for everyone. It has a global approach, but in order to achieve those goals, the government, every country can make policies in terms of their resources, in what manner. So the compare there would be a comparative analysis of different countries making different policies, and it would help to discover, or it would help to understand the pattern and the causes of policy differences, particularly that how one nation's policies would be different from another country. So this approach would help in understanding the differences between nations in policy matters. It can, by examining variations across nations, it helps to identify factors that would lead to stronger welfare states, such as political ideologies, the level of wealth or income, and social equality and equity. So some developed nations, or they would be a very stringent and strong policy in terms of welfare, in terms of the political ideologies, and other underdeveloped nations or the developing, they might not, the policies might not that be impactful in effective. So in a way, we can do a comparative analysis, so that could be replicated in other parts of the country. Then, if we say that, if we talk about the healthcare system, the healthcare policies in various parts of the Western world, like maybe in US, Canada, European countries, they reveal significant differences in access, funding, and outcomes, often attributed to political ideology and historical context. Then we have historical, critical feminist and intersectional approaches, critical feminist and intersectional approaches. It examines how social policies, they affect different groups, particularly the marginalized ones, and how issues like gender, race, and class intersect in policy impact. These approaches, these approaches critique that how social policies can reinforce gender roles or racial inequalities, and seek to identify ways policies could address these disparities. In the previous approaches, if we talk about, they had been a feminist approach, that the policy should be made in such a manner that it should be more women centric and women oriented. Then anti-racist approach was also there to look into any kind of disparities or racial inequalities. So, and this is important, where welfare reform should be created in such a manner that it would be that the welfare reform should be created in such manner that it would demand, or rather it would focuses on inclusivity and growth, and it would tackle the issues of, if any broader social and racial inequalities, or discrimination or violation, or any kind of oppression. Then historical institutions, studies shows that historical events and previous policy choices shape current policy decisions. This approach also suggests that policies are often path dependent, meaning that they are influenced by past decisions that created any constraints on future policy making. So sometimes, there in the previous, if you look into the in industrial during the course of industrialization, there weren't any labor welfare measures, no welfare condition, no labor, no welfare provisions for the labor. They were exploitation. So after that, it helped, after the doom of capitalist societies and capitalism, it gave rise to understand the labor concerns. It regularized the working hours, since industrialization was growing rampantly. So it further paved way that what can be done in order to protect and safeguard the interest of the working class, to look after the welfare approaches. So the historical anecdotes, historical events, and historical experiences are, they paved way for creating policies in particular areas, maybe health or housing, welfare, education, and so on. So there has to be, so this resulted in health insurances, social security, and social insurances. Then advocacy coalition framework, this studies focuses, or rather it studies coalitions of interest groups, policy makers, and advocates who collaborate with each other based on their shared beliefs to influence policies. So advocacy coalition framework would be a group of people, or it would be studying, or it would be this would talk about creation of interest groups or policymakers or experts and advocates who would be collaborating with each other, cooperating with each other, and would have some shared beliefs, common motive, common agenda to influence any policy or to influence public policy, particularly public policy in their own country or throughout the globe. So the framework looks at how advocacy groups with different bodies, it would be liberals or conservative, or any such parties that would compete or collaborate with each other to shape policies in specific domains like healthcare or education, environmental policies. And if I look into an example of it, then environmental social policies is also shaped by coalitions, by activists, lobbyists, and businessmen, or or influential people, or academicians, each pushing their policy preference, which would be based on their common shared beliefs about the role of the government and the role of private institutions, also individual responsibility in the environmental protection. There are certain key components of political environment. If you look into the political institutions, legislative bodies, this is parliaments, congresses, assemblies, executive branch presidents, prime ministers, and cabinets that would implement policies, and the judiciary, of course, the courts and legal system that interpret laws and resolve disputes. If we talk about the political processes, election system, the legislative process, they bring about a stability, or these political institutions, they actually they create the political environment, and through these three important bodies, through them, the policies or any laws, legislations have been debated, deliberated upon, passed by both the houses. It comes to the floor. The prime ministers, the executives, the head of ministries, the other cabinet members, they all are party in implementation and deliberation of these policies. And of course, the judiciary, the court, plays a significant role in understanding, in creating the clarity in the legal system, interpreting laws, and resolving any disputes. The impact of political environment on policy making. Okay, I would stop here, and in the next class, I would begin with the impact of political environment and policy making. Thank you, everyone.